Welcome everyone to this special lunch and learn session. My name is Arun Lakshmanan and I work within the Global Technology Group, and I'm really excited to be here among great people within Starbucks. And I want to introduce Radhanath Swami. I'm very fortunate and excited to be here in his presence. The topic for today's session is Influence without Affluence, the power of authenticity and integrity. So Radhanath Swami, to introduce him, he's a spiritual and humanitarian leader and an author, a public speaker, and over and above all of that, he's just a very genuine and caring person. So I wanted to, try and look at some certain parallels between some of the Starbucks' guiding principles, the mission statement, and the work that Radhanath Swami does. So the Starbucks mission statement reads, to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. And Radhanath Swami has been doing exactly the same thing for the past 22 years, working with a diverse group of individuals from different backgrounds to inspire and nurture the spirit of people, especially children who are in need. Starbucks lays particular emphasis on respect and dignity to everyone, and that is the same pillar with which Radhanath Swami has approached his work in making the world a better place for everyone. As detailed in his autobiography, there are some sample copies available today, limited copies, and Radhanath Swami will be signing the copies if you want to pick up one on your way out. It's available on Amazon.com as well. But that is his autobiography, and I've read that book myself over a year ago, and once I started reading it, I just couldn't put it down. It took me 2 days, but a lot of complaints from my wife and children, but I was stuck to the book. And I'm inspired again to actually read it again, so I'll be doing that very soon. So Radhanath Swami was born to a Jewish family in suburban Chicago, and in 1970, at an age of only 19, he left his home in America, seeking adventure and spiritual knowledge. After trekking and hitchhiking across Europe for several months, he reached his long-hoped destination, India. Convinced from his world travels that the fundamental problems of society are simply caused by simple, basic human frailties, irrespective of race, nationality, sex, religion, or economic status, he decided to dedicate his life to the exploration of solutions to the world's problems through advancement in human consciousness. And the results? With no bank account, nor a single penny to his name, Radhanath Swami, together with his highly energetic team of professionals, they have built a visionary hospital in Mumbai that provides low-cost and free holistic health care, a midday meal program that feeds an outstanding 200,000 meals a day for students, an eco-village, an orphanage for underprivileged children, a children's school that provides holistic education in a loving and fun atmosphere, free eye camps that have removed cataract for 33,000 patients to date, and an hospice for terminally ill patients. So quite outstanding work on his part and his team. In today's speech, Radhanath Swami will share insights from his 22 years of experience working with thousands of engineering graduates and medical professionals to build such large-scale community projects solely based on the merits of his authenticity and integrity. So without any more delay, so you don't have to hear me keep rambling, I would like to invite Radhanath Swami.
Jnananjana chalakaya chakshurunmilitam Bhunjena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanande. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Suryavadi Ascharyadesh Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyadevacha Patithanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Very much honored and grateful to be with all of you today. I was asked to speak on the subject of influence without affluence. Whoever chose the title, thank you. I live in India, and I've heard wherever I go in the world so many nice things about Starbucks. Even people I know who don't drink coffee like to go there because the atmosphere is so nice and so free, and I guess the quality of what you serve there is very attractive to people. Because what satisfies the heart, really, is quality. And so often in the world we live, people compromise, even disregard their need for quality and a passion for quantity. Martin Luther King said that the irony of our times is we have guided missiles and misguided people. And just a couple weeks ago, I gave a lecture at Princeton University with Dr. Cornel West, and he was expressing his observation how the world is so much distracted by weapons of mass distraction. Because what we're looking for is a deep experience, a life where there is meaning and fulfillment. Things can give some fulfillment to the body, the senses, and the mind, but things cannot touch the heart. Relationships based on affection, based on love, and based on integrity is where we can find actual inner fulfillment. Years ago, I was sitting on the bank of a river, the Ganges, and I looked up in the sky. It was a beautiful, clear sky, and saw a hawk with its wings spread, hovering in the air, soaring in circles, coming lower and lower and lower. I looked up, and he was just a few feet above my head. Wings were brown, golden, white, and his eyes, these yellow eyes, were fixed in total concentration on the river. Suddenly, it dove headlong into the river, went underwater. There was a skirmish. It was splashing, some noise. I was watching. A few seconds later, the hawk emerged with a fish caught in its claws. This fish was about a foot wide, a foot long, and was flapping desperately for its life as the hawk took it higher and higher and higher, and then away into a forest. And I was thinking, how this is so much like an analogy of the world we live in. That the fish was just going about his or her ordinary life like any other day, probably swimming with a school of relatives and friends, looking for food, flapping around, playing with friends. And at the least expected moment, the hawk of faith ripped it right out of its comfort zone. There's a verse, Padam Padam Yadvi Padam Nadesha, within the Vedas, which explains the nature of this world is we can expect the unexpected at any moment. Some years ago, I was sleeping. I sleep on a straw mat on the floor in Bombay, a small room, and as I was resting, I woke up around 4 o'clock in the morning, and the whole building started shaking. The books on my bookshelf started falling to the floor, the shutters, the windows, the doors were going and downstairs we have an orphanage, and I heard these 50 little children screaming out God's names. It was an earthquake. We didn't expect it. Everything shook for about 30 seconds. Little damage done to our building. But just 200 kilometers away, 12,000 people died. And hundreds and thousands were without relatives, without homes. Nobody expected it. It's just the nature of the world. Things change. But if that fish swam deeper, it could not be affected by that hawk. The hawk could not reach it. And all the great wisdom cultures, and all the great spiritual teachers, they have a universal principle that they emphasize. That real happiness, real fulfillment, is something that must be found within ourselves. If we cannot find it within ourselves, we will not find it anywhere else or everywhere else. A foundation, this wonderful building, I was being explained how it's such an eco-friendly, environmentally sound building. How many people, when they come in here, they say, this building has a fantastic foundation. People don't notice foundations. They don't talk about foundations because we can't see it. But factually, it is the foundation of the building that holds up everything. Without a strong foundation, when a storm comes, it collapses. How to sustain integrity in this world where things could change at any moment? We can define integrity as the willingness to embrace the ideals that we hold sacred in our lives, even in the face of temptation or fear. Temptation that we can get so much more if we compromise, or fear that we may lose so much if we do not compromise. Integrity is to choose what is right rather than what is easy. Integrity is to live with values, and those values are not dependent on where we are or who we're with. They're dependent on something much deeper, something much more sacred. And the greatest people who have made the greatest influence in people's lives throughout history are people who lived by their ideals. When I was young, growing up in a suburb of Chicago, there was a lot of affluence. But myself, what to speak of people around me, were not satisfied. For those of you who were around in the 1960s, I think you know what I mean. It was like that all over the country. There was a counterculture. And that counterculture wasn't people coming out of very poor environments. They were middle and upper middle class people and wealthy people. Their children, they found that we have everything, but it's shallow, it's superficial. People were looking for ideals. There was a Vietnam War, there was a civil rights movement. A lot of things just didn't make sense. And myself, I tried to make sense of things by entering into social activism. But what I found over time is that we people who were revolting against what we felt was superficial and shallow, we had the same qualities, just with a different cause. If we really want to make a change in the world, as Gandhi said, we have to be the change we want to see. And that means to live with ideals. I heard something that really changed my life. If you do not have an ideal that you're willing to die for, you really have nothing very meaningful to live for. And what is that ideal? Eventually, in my own life, I came to the conclusion that it would have to be something spiritual. To know myself. To actually be an instrument of real compassion in the world that we live in. The happiest people are not necessarily the people who have the best and the most things. But the happiest people are those who appreciate what they have, whatever the quantity may be. In India, Mahatma Gandhi, he gained the faith and the trust of millions and millions of people simply on the basis of his integrity. He just wore a little piece of cloth that cost about 10 cents around his waist. Usually he didn't even wear a shirt, had little sandals, didn't have his own home. He wasn't giving people anything of material affluence, but he gave people hope. He gave people faith. He gave people determination simply on the basis of integrity. In my own life, my beloved Guru, Srila Prabhupada, he came to America on a cargo ship when he was 70 years old. And when he arrived, he had 40 rupees, which is equal to $7. And when he tried to change it, nobody in America wanted rupees. So virtually he had nothing, and he didn't know anyone. And he began living in the Bowery, which was the ghetto of Manhattan at the time. But within a few short years, he had tens and thousands of people following him all he had was simply his integrity and a message of integrity. And I remember he came back to Bombay some years later, and he was speaking to a room of business people. And they were very affluent people. And he told them that these young American men and women, he said, they are working for me 24 hours a day, and I'm not giving them anything. And they're coming from wealthy families, and they're assisting me, who came there with nothing. And what was more interesting, in the 1960s, when this happened, the battle cry of the counterculture was never trust anyone over 30. There was a cultural revolution going on in the sense of the older generation and the younger generation. And here were tens and thousands of these people who were putting their full trust and faith in somebody who was 70. There is no greater power than good character. And from a spiritual perspective, good character is dependent on our capacity to be instruments of compassion, to be instruments of love. That gives deep inner satisfaction. We were speaking about a foundation. In order to maintain our good character, Haramdrisvani Vartate, we have to attach ourselves to something deeper than the temptations and the fears that will inevitably come upon us. That is the foundation. There's a verse in the Bible that if you build your house on shifting sand, then when a storm comes, however magnificent that house may be, it's going to collapse. But if we build our house on solid rock, then no storm can push it down. Last year, I was asked to speak at the headquarters of Apple, Intel, and several other companies, Stanford University. And of all the companies that I was speaking at, they asked me to speak on the same subject, how to deal with stress. So I don't know how you are at Starbucks, but most other corporate people are really stressed out, it seems to me. And to deal with stress, there's better ways than taking antidepressants or getting intoxicated or just trying to forget it all with some sort of entertainment. Stress comes when storms appear in our life. Sometimes during the monsoon rains in India, the storm lasts for 4 months, sometimes one storm. Other times it's periodic. We have to be prepared. And that preparation comes through inner fulfillment. It begins by recognizing what really is meaningful, what really is to be prioritized in my life. We should be very careful not to be possessed by our possessions, which is usually what happens. We have so much, and we have to live and make so many sacrifices just to maintain what we have. Our possessions should be utilized for a useful purpose. We should be careful not to be prisoners of our own success. Our success in life should give quality, fulfillment, and should help us to actually be instruments of something very good within the world. We shouldn't be slaves of our success. distracted from what's really meaningful. I'm a Swami, so I travel around, I have no possessions. Recently I spoke at the HSBC Bank headquarters in London at Canary Wharf, and there were 850 bankers that came to my lecture. I guess it was better advertised than here at Starbucks. And I guess bankers are more stressful, I don't know. I began the lecture by being honest, because what else can we do? And I said, I'm very honored to be with all of you in one of the greatest banks in the world, many of the greatest bankers in the world. I think there were 4 CEOs there. And I said, especially because, to be honest with you, I haven't had a bank account or signed a single check since 1969. It's 41 years ago. So I think they really liked that. They felt that I'm definitely not a competitor with them. They had no fears of me. So they opened their hearts to hear whatever I said. But it is true that real affluence is the inner wealth. Helen Keller, she was a blind lady, but very wise. Sometimes when you don't have the facilities that ordinary people have, you really go deep into other things. Some of the greatest musicians in the world were blind, sometimes even deaf. She wrote that the most beautiful things in life are not what are seen or touched, but what are felt in the heart. After reading that, I was thinking that she sees so much more clearly than all the rest of us with these eyes. What are we really looking for in life? Once we discover that foundational principle of our sacred ideal, then we harmonize our occupation, our family, every aspect of life in that spirit. It's not about changing our occupation. It's about transforming our consciousness. Each and every one of us, we have a higher self and a lower self. The Native American Indians, they explained it in this way, that each of us within our hearts, there is a good dog and a bad dog. The good dog is barking and promoting honesty, humility, forgiveness, good character, integrity, and the bad dog, anger and envy and greed and arrogance and all of those things. And there's a fight between these dogs. How many of you have that experience? Which of the dogs is going to win? Sometimes the bad dog is barking so loud, and the good dog is the one we choose to feed is the one that's going to be strong and win. And we feed according to the choices we make every moment. This is the special quality of human life, is we have the free will to choose to either feed the good dog or the bad dog, moment after moment after moment. When I was in Bombay a few years ago, I was speaking at a college for certified and chartered accountants. And I gave a lecture on the subject I was asked to speak on. There was about 400 accounting students in this auditorium. Now, in India, young students can be extremely enthusiastic. So I dared to ask if there was any questions. And immediately, before I even finished saying, is there any questions, this one person, his hand went way, way up. I called on him. He stood up. As soon as he stood up, everyone in the room went, and I realized that he was a very well-known, charismatic, influential person. He screamed at me at the top of his voice. He was really angry. He said, "You are a cheater. Everything you said is completely useless. You are totally misleading us. What would happen if everyone in the world became a Swami like you? Who would do the banking? Who would grow the foods? Who would run the governments? Who would teach our children? Therefore, everything you say is useless and rejected." He got a standing ovation. All the 400 students were clapping and cheering and howling. And I was standing at the podium. It took about a minute till they calmed down. And to be honest with you, I said a little prayer to myself. Please, give me the words to respond. Would you like to know what I said? I said, "Dear sir, what would happen in the world if everyone became an accountant like you? Who would do the banking? Who would grow the food? Who would run the governments? Who would educate our children? In fact, if everyone in the world became an accountant like you, there would be a 100% unemployment rate because nobody would need an accountant." I explained that human society is compared to the body. There are different parts to the body, and each has their unique feature and their unique capabilities. The eyes cannot do what the stomach does. The ears cannot do what the hands do. The kidneys cannot do what the feet do. They're all unique. They look different, different colors, different shapes, they're from different places. They can do different things. But as long as they're all working in harmony and respect and appreciation for each other, for the benefit of the whole body, then we're healthy. When the whole is healthy, every part is healthy. So similarly, humanity is to see unity in diversity. Not just to tolerate it, but to appreciate it, to honor it, to encourage it. Whether we're black or white or red or yellow in color, or brown, whether we're male or female, rich or poor, whether we're Hindus or Muslims or Buddhists or Jews or Christians or Sikhs or Jains or Parsis or atheists or agnostics, whether from the east or the west, whether we're lawyers or farmers, politicians or teachers. This is a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. That real wisdom is to see every living being with equal vision, because we see the sacredness of life. When we recognize and understand the sacredness within ourselves, of who we are, this is the beginning teachings of the Gita. That we are that living force that's seen through the eyes, hearing through the ears, tasting through the tongue, thinking through the brain, and loving through the heart. We are that conscious force. And that conscious force, according to many of the great spiritual traditions, is a sacred part of God. We have the same origin. We are all brothers and sisters in essence. And when we recognize our own essence, we can recognize that essence in others. And there can be actual love, actual appreciation, and most of all, genuine compassion. Perhaps the greatest need in the world today is compassion. And real compassion is not selfish, it's selfless. Paradukadukhi. This means that an actual wise person is a person who another person's suffering becomes my suffering. Another person's happiness becomes my happiness. These principles are the real basis of good character, the real basis of integrity. And whether we have tremendous affluence or very little affluence materially, it really doesn't matter. What matters is what we're living for and the sacredness of our ideals. Just like if a knife is on the street, a thief will use that knife to slash somebody's throat and steal everything they have. And a surgeon will take that same knife and save a person's life. Is the knife good or bad? The knife is neutral. It's as good or bad as the character of the person who's holding it. So similarly, money, fame, power, knowledge, talents, they could be used for destruction and distraction, or they can be used for healing and compassion and enlightenment. When knowledge is in the hands of evil people, it has tremendous power to do harm. When wealth is in the hands of evil people, the same. But when those same things are in the hands of people with integrity and character, they can have tremendous benefits for ourselves and the whole world. We work on ourselves so that we can better serve others. And by serving others, that's the best way of working on ourselves. The bottom line, greatest cause of problems in this world is arrogance and selfishness. And true spirituality is not about a sectarian identification. It's about people who are honestly, sincerely striving to transform our hearts from arrogance to humility, from greed to generosity, from vengeance to forgiveness, from agitation into peace, from meaningless to meaningfulness, from hate to love, to be an instrument of a power and a grace that is way beyond our own. When we make those the values of our lives, we become like an ocean. An ocean in India during the rainy season, rivers are sometimes miles wide, pouring into the ocean. And in the dry season, sometimes the rivers dried up and nothing comes into the ocean. But it's not that the river overflows during the monsoons and it doesn't dry up or reduce during the dry season, because the ocean has its own fullness. Similarly, a little puddle of water, whatever you put in it, tremendously affects it, or whatever you don't put in it. If we find within ourselves a depth of fulfillment, satisfaction, happiness, then whatever may happen in the world cannot disturb that. And the greatest happiness is to connect to our own essence, the Atma, which is undying, which is unborn, a part of God, Satchidananda, eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss. The Bible says, what is the use if you gain the whole world if you lose your eternal soul? When we connect to that inner satisfaction within ourselves, then we can stand firm and make the right choices to be instruments of goodness and grace in every situation. And perhaps that's the greatest need in the world today. This means that what the leaders of society do, common people follow. And we see in today's world, and it's nothing new, people who have high positions. I remember some years ago, I met a very famous cricket star in India. I happened to be on the same airplane as him. And there was hundreds of young people just running after him for autographs, and he was hiding because he just couldn't deal with it. And we were standing at the baggage claim together. And I said to him, you have such a responsibility because what you do is going to be the precedent that all these hundreds and thousands of young people are going to follow. Because you're their idol, you're their hero. He said, I'll think about that. And a couple months later, he was removed from the cricket league because he was involved in corruption. On Wall Street, in politics, in education, it's crippling. And especially in spirituality and religion, it's crippling when people put their own selfish motives above their service to others. What really brings true satisfaction to the heart is to love. And love is based on an unselfish willingness to serve. Meditation, prayer, piety, these are all universal principles of how to access them. In our own tradition, we chant God's names. We believe that God has many names, and in each of those names is a divine sound vibration that actually awakens that inner peace, that inner love that is within all of us. These are a few thoughts on the subject today. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Oh, I forgot to tell one thing. I gave the answer to that accounting student about how we should learn to appreciate each other, even according to our differences. I told him at the end, I said the world needs teachers. The world needs farmers. The world needs bankers. The world needs doctors and lawyers and engineers, and the world needs politicians, and the world needs accountants, and there's some place in the world for Swamis too. So instead of fighting about who's better, why don't we all work together and do something beautiful?
My question is, why did people give this guy a standing ovation and then gave it to you? You know, they were in agreement with everything that he was asking, but then they were in agreement with what you were saying. So,
Students are not always that easy to figure out when they're in groups. But as far as I could see, they were giving the standing ovation because he was challenging authority. Because whoever's standing in the podium was kind of like an authority in the school. He was challenging everything that I stood for. But then when I gave an answer, they accepted the answer. Even when I gave the answer, he went like this. Sat down. Actually, he just wanted, in his own creative way, to understand deeper what I was saying. He was actually a good person. That was like his technique to extract something deep from me. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hi. One of my favorite quotes of Gandhi, I think I have it right, is something like, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Yeah.
And could you address that or talk about what that might mean to you or us?
Forgiveness is a divine virtue. When we hold vengeance toward another, we're really corrupting our own consciousness. It's compared to if you're angry with someone and you pick up a red-hot coal to throw it at him, who gets burned? And there's a Chinese proverb that when you want to destroy someone, you should dig 2 graves, because you destroy yourself with that intention. So what Gandhi's speaking of is cultivating a spirit of compassion. We have to see the whole picture of what's actually good for us and what's good for the world. It's very crucial, especially in the world today. In so many places I travel, people hate each other and terrorize each other over things that were done generations back that their forefathers did. Yes? When I was a little boy, I write about it in the book, one of my friends, he told me that my parents hate you. And I said, why? I was 7 years old. My friend was 7 years old. He said, because you're Jewish. My parents said, you killed Jesus. 7-year-old boy? I didn't think I had anything to do with what happened 2,000 years ago. And then he said, my parents said, even God hates you. And I asked him, do you hate me? He said, no, you're my best friend. But when you grow up, I might hate you because you're Jewish. Now this is, hatred that goes back to something that may have happened 2,000 years ago, according to interpretation. And we see, in India, there was a big collision between the Muslims and the Hindus at the time of partition. And to this day, Pakistan and India are enemies. And people are trained to hate on the basis of what happened about 60 years ago. one of my best friends, his father was an officer in the SS of the Nazi regime. And he marched with the Nazi military into Lithuania and practically murdered the entire Jewish race there. He was also involved in concentration camps. My father's relatives, his cousins, his uncles, his aunts, every one of them practically was killed in Lithuania by the Nazis. And this man was the son of an SS officer who was part of all that. And myself was the son of someone who was, relatives were killed by his father. We are best of friends. How is it that we're best of friends? Really best of friends. Because we have understood that there's a higher principle than vengeance. There's a higher principle than hate. There's a higher principle than greed. There's so many reasons that we can disagree with each other. But to honor and appreciate and respect each other on the higher principle that life is sacred. That there's a divine purpose that we can all serve together. So yes, there's so many reasons to fight, and there's so many reasons for eye. And sometimes we have to deal with that. Justice is sacred when it's fair and it's compassionate. But there's a higher principle that we should also be connected to. And that's the divinity, the sacredness of life, and to respect and honor that. And I believe Gandhi was warning us that if we just keep fighting about what's happened in the past, we're just going to destroy the world. We have to come to a higher level. We learn to forgive. We learn to move on in a positive direction together. As long as we're constantly trying to work out what really happened in the past and who did what and who did it first, and we're going to argue forever. There's a higher purpose that we can all serve together. And that's sacred. An instrument of compassion. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Actually, my question is more towards the topic of our discussion today, which was affluence versus influence. The question that you said, the example that you quoted about a guy standing up and asking you a question, and the crowd went silent because he was an affluent person, and whatever he said might have been applauded by the crowd based on his affluence, which was causing that influence, partly because probably what he said. And then when you answered, and you were the speaker of the group, so you were an affluent person yourself. Now, when the crowd applauded again, was it not because of your affluence that was causing that influence again?
As far as I could see, it wasn't because of my affluence, it was because what I said was true. The truth has the most powerful influence. And if we're affluent, or if we're not affluent, if we represent in our values in life higher truths, it will have tremendous influence on people's lives.
So I agree with that part about the honest and truth reigns supreme. But say, for example, we work in all these professional societies. Now, in our work, we have so many places wherein just because there's a position that a person holds or the influence that a person holds, that influences all decisions. I mean, I see your point spiritually and leading a good life, that yeah, honesty rules, but again, in our workplaces, in our day-to-day lives, we don't really see everywhere that what is right rules it. It's basically more of influence and it gets the influence. I'm just trying to understand that even knowing that fact, how can we really use that fact as a more guiding principle in our life, that how can we still stay away from it?
If a tree has strong roots, then even a tornado may not be able to push it down. But if a tree has weak roots, then even a small wind can make it fall to the ground. So it's important that we cultivate our roots. The roots cannot be seen. They're deep. The deeper the roots, the stronger the tree. Yes? Our spiritual practices, if we give time to associating with people who uplift our values and help us go deeper. We read books that uplift our values and help us go deeper. We have regular spiritual practices that uplift our values and help us go deeper. Then we gain wisdom, we gain realization through that fulfillment, in which we can make decisions in the workplace that have value, that have integrity. And it's not that corruption rules. Sometimes because corrupt people become so big, it seems that way. The greatest thing in the world is actually character. And to be an instrument to help other people to gain higher character. To love. To love God with all your heart, mind, and soul is the first commandment of the Bible. And the natural byproduct is to love your neighbor as yourself. So to cultivate that love within our heart, that means we have to give time to it. We have to give priority to it. And when we have that, then we will be equipped, we will be strong, we will be armed with integrity, with character, with inner peace, with clarity of vision in all of our daily activities, in our family, in our workplace. Does that answer your question?